installment of the Veteran Voices Lives and Stories series entitled We Hire Veterans. My name is Seth Gordon. I'm the director of the Veteran and Military Center here at Wright State University. We are webcasting from the New Media Incubator in the basement of the Wright Dunbar Library. I want to take some time to recognize our supporters and those that made this series possible. First, this program is made possible in part by Ohio Humanities, a state affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this short film and on this panel discussion do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities. I want to acknowledge a few contributors first. First, the entire story arc was presented by Navy and Air Force veteran Jeremy Tack. Also, I wanted to acknowledge Erica Carter, the Veterans Voices project coordinator, for all of her support and advice in moving these films forward. Second, none of this would be possible without the support of many offices at Wright State University, including the Division of Student Success, Research and Sponsored Programs, the Office of Equity and Inclusion, and the College of Liberal Arts, in particular the English Department and the Communications Department. I want to give special thanks to Dr. Ashley Hall and Dr. Jen Ware, who co-direct the New Media Incubator and serve as executive producers on the project, and have been responsible for coordinating much of the student effort that has gone into making this project a reality. Thank you. And to our panelists. So let's start. If you could each introduce yourself, what you do at your place of work, and for Dan, what you did in the military and what you do now. And then I'll ask some serious questions. So really quickly, why don't we start here? We'll start there.
I'm Ina Petras. I'm senior HR leader for one of the GE's manufacturing shops here in Dayton, also known as Dayton Elena. So very excited to be here.
Great, thank you.
I'm Dan Semsel. I'm a retired Air Force colonel. I was the vice commander at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base for the 88th Air Base Wing when I retired in 2013. I am now the Western Ohio Regional Workforce Consultant for the Ohio Department of Veteran Services. I've been in this role for 3 years, assisting employers with reaching out and hiring veterans in the state of Ohio.
So let's start with your first reactions to the film. Just what came to mind watching it? Whoever wants to start.
I think I was rather excited to see how it came together, because having sat on the panel, I remember that perspective, but I didn't see how it was all going to blend together. So this was nice to be able to see the comments we made and the perspectives we shared while sitting on the panel actually out in the workforce, and see some of the veterans that are in the workforce giving their angle for what it was like for them to transition and where they are now, what they're doing, and how their military service played into that. It was quite pleasing to see that.
Good.
Yeah, as a company who's looking to tap that talent, tap into that pool of talent, it was interesting for me to see what are some of the questions that the veterans have, or what are some of the unknowns that they don't know how to start researching, or what are some of the tools that could be useful in their journey. And but most importantly, how are some of the skills that they bring from the military applicable in our environment? And it got me thinking about what's the best way for us to not just create the job description to speak to that talent, but also how do we popularize that? How do we reach out and make it more intentional, and be more available, and maybe make the whole process less intimidating for them, so that we open that channel of communication.
So at the site that you're at right now, there are veterans and non-veterans working at this site, is that correct?
Correct, yes.
Is there a pronounced difference can you tell the difference between the veterans and non-veterans?
No, not visibly, no, not at all. I think that we're looking for that DNA that matches with the GE culture.
Okay.
And that is highlighted in not just good work ethic and disciplinary skills, but just that humility and that openness to getting that feedback, and just being receptive to some of the backgrounds that these people come with. So when they are on the shop floor, they're all the same. We don't differentiate in any way. What we do is we make an effort to celebrate those people more and reach out to them, especially this time of the year during Veterans Day. Celebrate them, tell their stories to the workforce, highlight the fact that we have so many of them among us. In fact, we have 100 veterans working at our shop.
Out of how many people?
800.
So about
12%.
Yeah.
Yep. So it's just a compelling story to see how many are among us, and we don't always think about that, maybe purposefully or intentionally. So we have to do more of that.
So that was, I mean, you're sort of leading into the question, which is what can we do, what can companies do to make the transition from the military to civilian easier at work? I mean,
We found that one of the things that we've noticed from working with veterans is that organizational culture counts. Companies that make an effort to welcome them, whether it's overt expression of appreciation for their military service or support through veteran resource groups within the organization, there's a lot of ways to build that organizational culture. When you leave the military, you're leaving a teamwork environment. It's all about what the team accomplishes. You have a set mission and you know where you're going with it. A lot of times veterans want to gravitate to that same thing when they enter the civil sector. So when they find an employer that values their military service, that has veterans on board already, that recognizes what they bring to the table, they kind of gradually work closer together. They kind of conglomerate into building a stronger organizational culture in their own rights.
so my experience sometimes, and I'll pick on them a little bit, but for instance, often when we have Marines in the Veteran and Military Center, they're always going to wind up sitting next to each other, and you don't even see them talk to each other. They just kind of have their own gravity, right? Is that true, you think, with the other military people in the organization? Like, whether they say it or not, they're going to gravitate towards each other?
We see that pretty much across the board, and it's you'll fall back to those people that you have shared experiences with. It's funny when you start talking to a couple of veterans, if they served in the same time frames, they'll start talking about what assignments they had, and they may have crossed paths and not even known it years before. They'll start talking about shared experiences like deployments. Even if they didn't deploy together, they both experienced something very, very similar. The workforce itself, what were their career fields in the military? Were there common touch points? And again, in many ways, it's kind of a comfort factor to talk to somebody that you know can relate to some of the experiences you had, even if they weren't directly there with you sharing them at the time.
And so in the film, we see also a real focus on how companies work with their employees who are actually in the military. We hear from Aaron, who gets all of the support from Synchrony packages, things like that. How has GE, do you have special policies that really try to make people who are still in, who are reservists or guardsmen, be able to navigate both of those worlds?
So we have an affinity network called the Veterans Network, and they have that safe space where they could connect with other people, share experiences, ask their questions, create a safe space for them. So that's a GE-wide affinity network.
So through the whole organization?
Correct, yes. And of course we have chapters, but the GE Aviation one has a big hub in Cincinnati. So that's their place where they could reach out to fellow veterans and connect with them and stay in touch and get best practices among them.
What are the mistakes that companies make? So one of the questions I have is, especially in the higher education sector, right? It's really easy. Nobody's going to say they're not military friendly, right? Like, we're military friendly, because the opposite is what? You don't like military people? Nobody's going to admit to that. And so, and I don't think anybody even thinks of themselves, it's not even about admitting, it's just being consciously, of course we like veterans, of course we like military people, but it's the behavior and the actions that veterans really pick up on more so than the language, I think. So how as an organization, I mean, the veterans networks are real, right? What other tangible things can you do as a company, or that you've seen other companies do, that really make the citizen soldier or the veteran say, oh no, that's the place I want to go. I mean, we see these examples of these transition programs at GE very specifically designed for the former officer. They're taking that very seriously. It's not just we're saying we're military friendly, here's what we're doing. What else how do we prove it?
We see a lot of value. First off, the Veterans Networks, the Affinity Network's a great example of that. Veteran resource groups, the gentleman from Synchrony in the film mentioned the Veteran Resource Group at Synchrony. Those are ways that you build that culture around the military service. But other things that we found that provide a decent amount of value are active mentorship.
Okay.
Where it comes down to actually having somebody, talking with somebody who's a veteran who's been in the company for 5 years, 10 years, and finding out how they navigated the organization, how their career path has flowed. That's a strong point, to have that military mentor, that veteran mentor. But equally important is having somebody that does not have that military background providing mentorship on this is what it's like now that you've taken the uniform off, to give you that perspective that you don't necessarily have, that you won't always get from a fellow veteran. By doing that, by combining a military veteran mentor and a non-military veteran mentor, you can really shape a new employee and help them grow within an organization. So mentorship beyond the affinity groups and resource groups, 2 ways to help build that culture around the individual veteran. And the last the real strong point that I see is companies that develop rotational programs to help tap into a lot of the talents that people don't realize they have. If you show a military veteran that this is the position you're coming into, but over time you're going to start here, but you're going to have an opportunity to rotate here, and you can move to here. Or you can take this path, basically developed career paths that show somebody this is where you're going to be in 5 years, this is where you're going to be in 20 years. If they see that, military loyalty can kick in and become an asset for that company. You're showing me where I will grow, and I am going to grow where I am planted. It's a win-win for the organization.
That's
Yep.
neat.
One of the bigger aha moments I had with veterans is that they do come from an environment maybe where their work was a little more prescriptive. They were told where they're going to go, and as someone was saying in the video, what kind of size of the team. There won't be much that they will own or initiate there. Whereas at least in GE, you kind of you own your own career path, and you have to map it yourself, of course with support, but you have to have some understanding of where that's going to go. So maybe we need to do a better job through mentorship, through HR support, through tools that we offer our veterans to understand, help them navigate that and help them show that initiative.
Right. I mean, you're talking about companies mimicking the path that is set, that what happens in the military. Like, here's your options, even if it's not, because every 3 years you're getting another assignment and you have a chance for promotion, right? It's, when it's happening. And in the non-military sector, that doesn't necessarily mean, it's not automatic, right? People aren't going to come and just find you and say, okay, it's been 3 years, now you get a promotion. Right? It's not, it doesn't work that way.
Well, in the military, it's not automatic either. It's the early part of your career, promotions are automatic. The first 4 years, if you're staying out of trouble and doing your work, you're going to get promoted for the first couple of years. After that, though, you're going to have to show technical competence and skills that warrant promotion. There's a selection process, and that's where companies can show a military member or a veteran, these are the gates that you need to go through if you want to develop. If you want to move off of a manufacturing floor operation and become a foreman or a supervisor, these are the things that you need to accomplish. So it's knowing there is a path, but the veteran has an obligation to meet the requirements for that path to even be considered, and that the opportunity has to be there. Because even if you hit all your gates, if there's no opportunity to move, you're not going to move. And it's kind of the same in the military. You could be the most technically gifted person within your career field, but if there's no opportunity for promotion, it doesn't matter. You won't get promoted at that time.
So I've never thought of it that way before. So for the one and done group, right, where they've been in for 4 years, there's some of that you still have to perform like and not screw up, as you're saying, but they still have to do well to get their promotions. But it's not as it's going to happen if they just keep showing up and doing their job.
Yeah.
But for those people that, so if they go in and come out, they've never experienced maybe the how am I going to really push to get promoted. It's not like I'm going to just be a lieutenant then a captain, right? If I might not get off captain if I don't start to demonstrate. I could be a captain forever. I could be a sergeant forever, right?
Well, even that, though, at a certain point in the military, you'll hire your tenure out.
Right.
At a certain point, they're going to say, okay, you're not advancing. It's time for you to step out and let somebody else move in. And it's similar in many ways to what I've seen in the corporate sector. I mean, some folks are very happy finding that position that they want to stay in. They've got skill sets that apply well for the position, and they don't have a desire to move beyond that job. And that's great. For some people, that is absolutely perfectly what they need when they leave the military. Stability is one of the things that military lifestyle doesn't provide. So this is an opportunity for some people to do that. But there are a lot of people that leave the military, particularly those first-termers that leave at between 24 and 28 years old. They want to go out and they want to do something. They want to walk in the door and say, how can I become at a higher level in this organization? How can I move from line worker to management? Or how can I move from an entry-level HR position into vice president of HR?
Right.
They want to see what that path is and what they have to achieve to get there. And then a lot of them will show you some creative ways to achieve those goals and find ways to be upwardly mobile.
So what do you think veterans can do to educate themselves best about the civilian work environment prior to entering it? So imagine, you're at some sort of environment and you have to give advice to somebody that's about to transition. What could they be doing in terms of researching companies, or what could give them an edge? Like, how do we give them advice before they enter the TAP program? How do we help them start thinking about this?
I think that they would have to start with understanding what's a culture, what's the difference in culture from the environment in their former environment and what's a corporate or a new business culture. What does that mean? What does that mean in terms of my interaction, my day-to-day interaction with the people around me, with my leadership? Then I would recommend looking into what's some of the lingo that people are using at work, and how am I going to speak to that lingo and make myself competitive next to the other person? What's gonna, because the employer, when he or she assesses a candidate, you try to translate the experiences that the person is telling you about into how that's going to look like in the workplace. So if we talk about, let's say in our place, what are our priorities on the production floor? Safety, quality, delivery, those are the priorities. Can the veteran, despite not having worked in a production environment, speak to some of those values and some of those expectations? Probably yes, and
right.
Most of the time yes. And then understand from there what are the priorities and the things that the company will want to go after. Understanding the customer, having a strong team, helping one another, empowering one another, and being profitable, being a responsible person there. So can they speak again to how they're going to contribute to some of those priorities that the company is going after? And just not be afraid to brag about themselves and sell themselves, because they may not necessarily go there initially, like what do I need to do to showcase my background, but the companies really look for that, and
right.
They need to understand how they can sort of tell their story.
Yeah, and that's a line. I mean, I've heard that. Talk a little bit about that.
It's a huge challenge, because
right.
in the military it's about the team and the function. You're working towards the mission as an organization. Your whole focus from the time you jump out of the bus at basic training and stand on those yellow footsteps having a drill sergeant tell you how important you are to the country, and not necessarily the most colorful language in the world, you are learning how to function as a team. So it's all about that team And you'll see unit pride ranging from inspections down to intramural sports. It's about what your team did. So when you leave the military and you have to start bragging about your skills, it's true, that's very much a challenge to a lot of our veterans to talk about what I did. What did Dan do in the Air Force, not what did the 5th LRS do at Minot Air Force Base. And that can be tough because then you have the language barriers and the acronyms that come from military service. So I'm trying to communicate the I using a language that doesn't always translate to what you're looking for at GE Aviation. And I'm trying to do it in a way that is going to sell you that my story matches your requirement.
Mm-hmm.
So the language barrier can be a challenge. And that whole breaking away from the team to the I, and kind of ironically going back, you're selling the I to become part of the team.
Right.
So it's amusing, and it is very, very challenging for a lot of veterans to do that break from their squad, from their company, from their wing, to suddenly being Dan or Seth,
Right.
and saying, "This is who I am."
So
I think,
go ahead.
sorry to interrupt. Let them try a couple of times. It's not going to be successful on the first try. Let them talk to multiple companies. Go out there, see if there's people will be open to an informational interview and possibly a site tour. Go to open houses. Understand the environment that you're trying to get into.
Do you think that these veteran affinity groups, like if I'm thinking about just getting out, could that be useful? Like if I brought a group of veterans that are just thinking about getting out and they went to talk to some of your veterans there, do you think that they're going to share back, here were the differences I found, right? They're going to be able to paint the picture of this is what the military was like and this is what GE is like, and here were the places where I misstepped, right? And do you do that? Is there any sort of orientation with when they get there, like here's your affinity network? I know you have it, but how do you encourage them to go get it?
So let me see if I understand the question. We
How do you enculture a group of new veteran employees to learn about the affinity network?
It's part of the orientation. It's part of their, there's a digital checklist that they would get on their first week on the job. We put them in touch. Again, the affinity networks themselves, they have a Yammer page, which is our internal social media. So there are multiple channels of communication. There are in-person events where they can go, because it's not just the veterans, it's veterans and allies, so everyone could be part of that affinity network. And those people who've lived both worlds are the best people to explain their whole journey and be their mentors.
And the company gives them time to go do that. They're not.
Absolutely, yes. It's often it's scheduled as a all company meeting notice, and you just attend if you want to, and sign up for it.
We found that a lot of times in the military, you'll get assigned a sponsor when you get a new assignment. So you'll have somebody you can reach out to and talk to before you even get there to learn the basics of navigating your new base, your new unit. You're going to find out about the schools. You're going to find out about the community that you're moving into. They're designed to help ease that transition to a new base. And we see that with the companies. If they have an active mentorship program or an affinity group, that's a great way to do the same thing for that brand new veteran employee that comes in. It's, hey, you may not be necessarily in the same division as me, but here's some things that'll help you get your feet planted firmly when you come on board. And it kind of starts that whole mentorship relationship on a more of an informal basis. But it eases the transition.
So is there any new or additional thoughts that you want to share with people that I might have missed or not asked?
Well, we like to highlight this. My role as a workforce consultant is to help the employers reach out to the veteran population. And one of the ways that we like to encourage our employers to do that is use the veterans not just as an internal resource, but as an external resource. If you go to a job fair, take one of your veteran employees with you, because veterans gravitate to other veterans, as we see. So having somebody there with an Army Strong lapel pin or their F-22 lapel pin standing at that interview or at that job fair with you is an icebreaker for that veteran to say, hey, that's somebody that served potentially with me, or that's somebody that can talk a little bit about my language. And that's two benefits. One, it's the sense of community with the veterans at the job fair or at the hiring event or the open house. The other thing that's nice is that veteran standing aside the HR can provide a little bit of language translation if somebody comes in with, like my first resume, which was a biographical history of where I lived. They can actually read through the lines and see what skills that veteran is trying to communicate with the resume, even if the resume is not in great shape to start with. So it's a win-win both ways. The veterans within an organization are one of the best tools to bring more veterans into an organization.
Final thoughts. So I will encourage the veterans to think of the ways that they can get training internally on job skills that they may not be thinking that they have. So if they're we have apprentice programs internally. We have rotational programs, much like the one that was covered in the documentary. It's the Junior Officer Leadership Program, or something similar. Or they could craft their own career path by, exploring different roles internally. And with companies like GE, which is very broad, has multiple sites and multiple operations, you could craft your own career internally. Just educate yourself. Don't be afraid to jump in and explore some of those opportunities, and reach out, ask questions, be, as they are, humble to not know the answer right away, and just be open to learning and educating yourself. And there are resources out there. Utilize them and inform yourself, and people are receptive to helping.
Great. Thank you for joining us for this question and answer session for the Veteran Voices Lives and Stories, our 5th edition. We're going to end it.